Hello, family. Welcome to Stories with Adagoma. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you, as you do. So sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Your husband's mistress just confessed to trying to kill you, but everyone thinks you're in a coma and can't hear a thing. How do you fight back when you can't move, speak, or even open your eyes? This is the impossible challenge Cynthia Thompson faces after Vanessa's sabotage leaves her trapped in a locked-in state. As Vanessa visits her hospital bed to gloat about stealing her husband and her life, Cynthia must find a way to communicate the truth before Vanessa decides to finish what she started. What happens next will test the limits of human resilience and prove that the strongest weapon we possess isn't physical strength. It's unwavering determination. Darkness enveloped her like a shroud. Cynthia's consciousness emerged gradually from the void, not with the usual stretching of limbs or blinking of heavy eyelids, but with an eerie alertness trapped within absolute stillness. Strange noises surrounded her, mechanical beeps, hushed voices, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes against linoleum. She tried to open her eyes, to move her fingers, to call out a simple hello, but her body refused every command. Panic rose within her like a tide, threatening to drown her in its intensity. Patient remains in a persistent vegetative state following severe trauma from the automobile accident, a clinical voice stated nearby. Brain activity shows minimal response to stimuli. We've informed the husband to prepare for long-term care arrangements. The word struck Cynthia like physical blows. Vegetative state? She wasn't vegetative. She was here, thinking, feeling, understanding every word. She screamed in her mind, desperate pleas that never made it past her motionless lips. The horror of her situation crystallized. She was imprisoned within her own body, a silent witness to discussions about her fate. Days passed in this twilight existence. Cynthia learned to track time through hospital routines, shift changes, medication administrations, the changing light through what she presumed were window blinds. She pieced together fragments of her story through overheard conversations. A devastating car crash, failed brakes, emergency surgery, poor prognosis. Each new detail built a more complete picture of her shattered life. When Daniel first visited, his familiar cologne reached her before his trembling voice. "Hey, sweetheart," he whispered, his hand warm against her unresponsive one. "The doctors they say you might not be able to hear me, but I'm here." His grief was raw, genuine, and Cynthia ached to comfort him, to squeeze his hand, to tell him she was still present. His tears fell onto her arm. She felt them, but couldn't wipe them away. The cruel distance between them, measured not in inches but in unbridgeable neurological damage, was perhaps the greatest torment of all. It was during Daniel's third visit that she first noticed another presence, a floral perfume too strong and sweet hovering at the edges of her awareness. Vanessa, Daniel's colleague. The woman placed a sympathetic hand on Daniel's shoulder as he wept, her voice dripping with concern. "She looks so peaceful," Vanessa murmured. "You're being so strong, Daniel. I don't know how you're managing." Only later, when Daniel had gone to speak with doctors, did Cynthia sense Vanessa lingering beside her bed. The atmosphere in the room shifted, the air suddenly charged with something malevolent. Vanessa's fingertips trailed along Cynthia's forearm, the touch no longer comforting, but invasive. "Poor Cynthia," Vanessa whispered, her voice transformed from sympathetic colleague to something cold and triumphant. "Everyone thinks you're gone, but I know you can hear me." The words sent icy terror through Cynthia's immobile form. "Doctors call it locked-in syndrome, consciousness trapped in paralysis. Fascinating, isn't it?" A satisfied sigh escaped Vanessa's lips as she leaned closer, her breath hot against Cynthia's ear. "Too bad you can't tell anyone what I've done." The threat lingered in the sterile hospital air as Vanessa straightened, a predator, confident in her perfect crime. Behind her sympathetic public persona lay a calculating mind that thrived on the vulnerability of others, especially those who couldn't fight back. In the days that followed her initial confession, Vanessa's visits became a twisted ritual, each one revealing another layer of her methodical plan as she believed herself free to speak without consequence. "You know, I watched you for months before I made my move," Vanessa whispered during one visit, arranging fresh flowers by the window while nurses changed shifts. "Daniel never noticed how I studied every detail of your life, your schedules, your habits, your weaknesses." She moved closer to the bed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "It was easy, really. A little tampering with your car's brakes, and voila, one tragic accident." Inside her prison of flesh, Cynthia burned with a fury so profound it seemed impossible that it couldn't physically manifest. Each revelation ignited a new flame of rage as the full picture of Vanessa's betrayal came into focus. The woman who had smiled at company parties, who had sent get-well cards when Cynthia had the flu, had meticulously engineered her destruction out of a distorted sense of entitlement to Daniel's life. "I deserve him more than you ever did," Vanessa murmured on another afternoon, perched casually on the edge of Cynthia's bed as though they were girlfriends sharing secrets. "He worked so hard, and you never truly appreciated him." She paused to adjust Cynthia's blanket with mock tenderness. "He's starting to lean on me now. Yesterday, I convinced him to pack away your clothes. For his healing, I told him." A satisfied smile played across her lips. "Your closet is half empty already." With each visit, Vanessa grew bolder, bringing in small personal items. Her favorite mug now resting on Cynthia's kitchen counter, her shampoo in the shower. She detailed how she comforted Daniel, how his resistance to her suggestions weakened day by day. Cynthia's internal screams echoed in the void of her consciousness, heard by no one as Vanessa systematically erased her existence. "We're planning a trip to your beach house next month," Vanessa announced 6 weeks after the accident, examining her manicured nails. Daniel was hesitant, said it was your special place, but I reminded him how healing it could be. "I've always loved that little cottage by the sea, the one you thought was your sanctuary." She leaned closer, her breath hot against Cynthia's ear. "Soon there won't be a corner of your life I haven't claimed as my own." The pieces fell together like a horrific puzzle. The clean cuts on brake lines that investigators might have dismissed as wear and tear. The calculated pursuit of a man whose wife stood in her way. The jealousy that had festered until it manifested as methodical sabotage. Vanessa hadn't just wanted Daniel. She had wanted Cynthia's entire life, believing it was rightfully hers to take. What Vanessa failed to account for in her meticulous planning was the silent witness trapped inside the broken body, a consciousness that absorbed every confession, every taunt, every revelation of her crimes. The perfect crime had an imperfect variable, loyalty that transcended medical certainty. Grace Martin had been Cynthia's friend since childhood, the keeper of her deepest secrets and witness to her brightest moments. When she first entered the hospital room, the lingering scent of an unfamiliar perfume caught her attention. Elegant, expensive, and distinctly not Cynthia's. The same fragrance she'd noticed clinging to Daniel's jacket when she'd stopped by with a casserole. "I know they say you can't hear me, Cyn," Grace whispered, settling into the chair beside the hospital bed. "But I'm not buying it." She reached for Cynthia's limp hand, her thumb tracing gentle circles on her friend's skin. "Remember when we crashed your dad's car senior year and swore we'd never tell a soul? 20 years later, and that secret's still safe with us?" Day after day, Grace returned, sharing stories, reading books aloud, describing the changing seasons outside the window, creating a lifeline of normalcy in a sterile room filled with beeping machines. Unlike Daniel, whose visits grew shorter and less frequent, Grace's presence remained constant, unwavering. Across town, Detective Harris now sat at his desk, files spread before him, his brow furrowed in concentration. The accident report troubled him. The clean cuts on the brake lines too precise to be mere wear and tear. His suspicions deepened after interviewing the mechanic who remembered Vanessa's unusual interest in vehicle braking systems just days before the accident. The mechanic had since disappeared, but the record of a substantial payment from Vanessa's account remained. "Her demeanor feels rehearsed," Harris noted in his personal journal. "There's calculation behind every sympathetic gesture." The detective's instincts, honed through 20 years of service, sensed deception beneath Vanessa's polished surface. Meanwhile, Grace began documenting Vanessa's hospital visits, noting the woman's Jekyll and Hyde transformation when nursing staff left the room. Her suspicions crystallized into certainty when she overheard Vanessa discussing vacation plans with Daniel to Cynthia's beloved beach house, no less, while her friend still fought for recovery. That night, Grace emptied her savings account to purchase a discreet recording device small enough to hide behind the flower arrangement she brought the next day. "Your brain is rewiring itself," she whispered to Cynthia. "The doctors don't believe me, but I see it. You're fighting to come back." For weeks, Cynthia channeled every ounce of her determination into moving a single finger. The neural pathways damaged in the accident required painstaking reconstruction, a biological miracle happening beneath the surface while machines monitored for the slightest change. When the first twitch came, so small it might have been missed, Grace was there to witness it. "Did you see that?" Grace called to the nurse. Her finger moved. The doctor dismissed it as an involuntary reflex, but Grace knew better. The movement had come precisely when she'd mentioned Vanessa's name. It wasn't random, it was communication. The hospital room had become a chessboard where life and death played for the highest stakes. As Cynthia's finger movements became more frequent and her eyelids occasionally fluttered, Vanessa's carefully constructed facade began to crack. What had started as a minor inconvenience, a supposedly comatose woman showing signs of consciousness, had evolved into an existential threat. Each subtle movement from Cynthia was a silent declaration of war, a promise that secrets buried might soon resurface. Vanessa's visits changed. Gone were the triumphant monologues and casual cruelty. Her eyes darted constantly to the monitors, her hands fidgeted with her necklace. The predator had spotted danger. One Tuesday evening, after visiting hours had officially ended, Vanessa slipped into Cynthia's room with surgical gloves already pulled over her manicured fingers. She moved with the calculated precision of someone who had planned this moment, reaching for the ventilator settings with practiced confidence. "I'm sorry it has to end this way," she whispered, her voice devoid of genuine remorse as she began adjusting dials. "But you understand, I've come too far to lose everything now." The door swung open. Grace stood frozen in the doorway, a vase of fresh flowers clutched in her hands. For one suspended moment, the women stared at each other, Grace's horror meeting Vanessa's cold calculation. Then chaos erupted. Grace lunged forward, dropping the vase as she slammed her hand on the emergency call button. Vanessa moved toward the door, but Grace planted herself firmly in the way as medical staff rushed in. Inside her prison of flesh, Cynthia fought with a desperate fury unlike anything she'd known before. This was her moment, perhaps her only chance. The neural pathway she'd been straining to rebuild for weeks now needed to connect just once, just enough to break through. She focused everything on her throat, on forming a single word with lungs that had forgotten how to push air voluntarily. When it came, the sound was barely audible, a raspy, broken whisper that nonetheless stopped every person in the room. "Vanus a." The courtroom 6 months later was nothing like the sterile hospital environment where Cynthia had waged her silent battle. Now, partially recovered, though still requiring a wheelchair and assistance with some functions, she faced her would-be killer directly. The prosecution presented an overwhelming case, Grace's recordings capturing Vanessa's confessions, Detective Harris's forensic evidence of brake tampering, and financial records linking Vanessa to the vanished mechanic. But it was Cynthia's testimony that resonated most powerfully through the hushed courtroom. Using an assistive communication device when her voice faltered, she described the psychological torment of being fully conscious, yet unable to respond as her attacker gloated over her broken body. Though the process was traumatic, facing her perpetrator directly became the final step in reclaiming her agency. When the judge announced the 20-year sentence for attempted murder, Cynthia felt no triumph, only a quiet relief that justice had finally prevailed, and a profound gratitude for the friend who had believed in her consciousness when medical science had written her off. When Cynthia finally left the rehabilitation center, she chose a path that surprised everyone. Rather than letting her trauma define her, she embraced the profound lessons it had taught her. Forgiveness became her most powerful tool for healing, not as an absolution for Vanessa's actions, but as a release from the prison of her own bitterness. Though physical therapy continued to be part of her daily routine, Cynthia found greater strength in reclaiming her narrative. Daniel had offered to rebuild their life together, his eyes filled with remorse and hope. But Cynthia recognized that true liberation came not from returning to what was, but from embracing what could be. She chose instead to forge her own path, founding a support network for survivors of traumatic injuries. Her journey transformed her understanding of resilience, proving that while her body had been broken, her spirit had discovered a deeper kind of strength that no paralysis could ever contain.